China is the most visited country you think you know. You've seen the Great Wall stretched across misty ridges. You've seen the terracotta warriors standing in their silent rows. You've seen Shanghai glittering at night from 100 postcards. But there is another China. A China that exists beyond the tour buses and the ticket queues. A China of glaciers that glow electric blue at dusk. Of caves so enormous entire cathedrals could disappear inside them. Of lakes so perfectly colored, they look like someone has spilled a painter's palette into the mountains. These are the places that even lifelong residents of China stumble across and say, I didn't know this was here. We're going to 29 of them, from the rice terraces of Guangxi to the grasslands of Xinjiang. From the holy peaks of Shanxi to the canyon lands of Gansu. From the ancient towns of Sichuan to the heavenly lakes of Tibet. This is Unseen China. One, Hailuogou Glacier, Sichuan. We begin in Sichuan province at the foot of Ganga Mountain, the highest peak in Sichuan at 7,556 meters, where one of China's most extraordinary natural collisions takes place. The Hailuogou Glacier meets the tropics. Hailuogou is the lowest elevation glacier in Asia. The glacier's snout descends to just 2,850 meters, well into the zone of subtropical vegetation. The result is one of the planet's most surreal landscapes, a 14-kilometer river of ice with ice falls hundreds of meters high, whose edges are draped in bamboo, rhododendron, and subtropical broadleaf forest. In recent decades, Hailuogou has retreated significantly due to climate change. The glacier has lost kilometers of its length within living memory. What you see today is magnificent, but it is also less than it was. This is quietly one of the most significant things about this place. The blue ice of a glacier is not painted and not filtered. It is the real color of ice compressed for centuries. When you stand close enough to touch it, which you can here, it is the closest most people will ever come to holding something from before recorded history. 2. Zhijin Cave, Guizhou. From the ice of Sichuan, we descend underground, deep into the limestone plateau of Guizhou province. A province riddled with caves, thousands of them, perhaps the densest karst cave system in the world. And of all those caves, Zhijin is the crown. Zhijin Cave is simply the largest and most decorated cave in China, and by most measures, one of the most spectacular in the world. It contains 6.6 kilometers of explored passage, though the full system is larger. And within those passages, virtually every type of cave formation known to science. Helictites. Cave formations that grow in directions that seem to ignore gravity. Cave pearls, smooth balls of calcite deposited in rimstone pools, perfectly rounded by dripping water. Moon milk, a soft, white substance of microbial origin that looks exactly like its name. Cave corals, cave shields, cave rafts, cave bacon. The Oriental Empire column is 17 meters tall and still growing at the imperceptible rate of cave time. A few millimeters per century, it began forming when humans were still learning to smelt iron. Zhijin is not a cave you visit. It is a world you enter. 3. Libo Zhangjiang Scenic Area. Guizhou gives us one more wonder, and it may be the most breathtaking. The Libo Zhangjiang Scenic Area, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and possibly the most spectacular karst forest landscape on Earth. Libo is home to one of the last pristine patches of subtropical karst forest in China. The biodiversity here is staggering. Over 1,000 plant species, dozens of rare endemic animals, forests that contain species found nowhere else on Earth. The Shui, Yao, and Bui peoples who have lived in this landscape for generations have developed cultures and farming systems precisely adapted to its contours. Finding flat land where there's almost none, building communities in the gaps between stone mountains, living in the only geography they have ever known. Libo is a landscape from before the age of plows and roads. Come here and remember what the world looked like when humans were new. 4. Yulong Snow Mountain, Yunnan. We move south into Yunnan, China's most romantically varied province. And here above the ancient city of Zhejiang, we find a mountain that its people have never stopped worshiping. The Naxi people of Zhejiang believe that Yulong, the jade dragon snow mountain, is the physical manifestation of a god. The mountain is sacred, untamed. And when you stand in the valley below and watch the clouds tear apart to reveal all 13 peaks at once, rising 5,596 meters from a valley floor at 2,400 meters, you do not struggle to understand why. Yulong is the southernmost glacier in the northern hemisphere. The cable car that reaches it is the highest in China, and the view from the glacier across the valley of the Yangtze River's upper reaches toward Tibet in one direction and the jungles of Southeast Asia in the other is one of the great panoramas of Asia. But the most beautiful thing about Yulong is not the glacier. It is the transition. The way the subtropical lowlands give way to temperate forest, then to alpine meadow, then to ice, all of it accessible, all of it visible in a single sweeping glance from the right ridge. Yunnan is a province of impossible transitions. Yulong Snow Mountain is where those transitions are most stark. 5. Basongkua Lake, Tibet. At 3,800 meters above sea level, in the heart of the Tibetan Plateau, there's a lake that Tibetan Buddhists consider sacred above almost all others. Basongkua, the Holy Lake. Jiaxi Island sits in the middle of Basongkua like something from a fairy tale. A small forest island entirely occupied by one of the oldest temples in the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism. The temple has stood here possibly for over 1,000 years. The monks who served it were gone for decades during the Cultural Revolution. They have returned. Basongkua's extraordinary color comes from the same source as many of Yunnan and Tibet's most spectacular lakes. glacial meltwater carrying suspended rock flour that scatters light into blues and greens of almost supernatural intensity. There are places that feel held, protected, as though the geography itself has cupped something precious and refused to let it go. But Songkou is one of those places. 6. Jiuzhaigou Valley, Sichuan. We return to Sichuan, and we have to talk about Jiuzhaigou. Jiuzhaigou Valley, Nine Village Valley, was discovered by the outside world in the 1970s when timber workers cutting into the mountains of northern Sichuan stumbled into a valley of lakes so colored and so numerous and so beautiful that they stopped cutting and went home and told people. It became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1992. The colors are produced by the interaction of water chemistry, algae, aquatic plants, and the depth and angle of the sun. A combination so specific and so complex that scientists have been trying to fully explain it for decades and haven't managed. What you see when you stand at the edge of Five Flower Lake and look into water that is simultaneously blue and green and gold and perfectly transparent, revealing every rock and log on the bottom in complete clarity. That has no simple explanation. Jiuzhaigou was severely damaged by an earthquake in 2017. Years of careful restoration work followed. The valley has healed remarkably. The lakes are recovering, the travertine dams rebuilding themselves, the forests growing back. There are 7 natural wonders of the world. Jiuzhaigou is sometimes called the 8th. After seeing it, you understand why. 7. Laojun, Mountain and Jiguan Cave, Henan. Province is China's historical heartland, the birthplace of Chinese civilization, where the Yellow River first supported cities and the first emperors unified the land. Travelers come for the Shaolin Temple, for Longmen Grottos, for the ancient capital of Luoyang. They often miss Laojun Mountain. Laojun Mountain is named for Laozi, the founder of Taoism, who is said to have completed his masterwork, the Tao Te Ching, while meditating in these mountains. The geology here is as philosophical as the tradition it birthed. Quartzite layers twisted by tectonic forces into curves and spirals that Taoists read as the visible form of the Tao itself, the great turning, the endless transformation of all things. Jiguan Cave at the base of the mountain is one of the largest accessible cave systems in central China, a fitting counterpoint to the mountain above. Where Laojun Mountain reaches toward heaven, Jiguan reaches into the earth. Together, they represent the full vertical axis of Chinese cosmology. Some mountains make you feel the age of the earth. Laojun Mountain makes you feel the age of ideas. 8. Tianmen Mountain in Hunan. Tianmen Mountain, outside the city of Zhangjiang in Hunan Province, has the most dramatic entrance of any mountain in China, and possibly anywhere. Heaven's Gate. That's what Tianmen means. The arch formed approximately 263 million years ago when the limestone collapsed, leaving this precise rectangle of open sky. To the Chinese people who have venerated this mountain for 2 millennia, The coincidence of that shape, a doorway, a gate, a portal, was not coincidence at all. The glass walkway of Tianmen is one of China's most popular extreme experiences, designed to be terrifying. Succeeds completely. But above the arch, above the glass walk, above all the engineered drama, Tianmen has a summit that is simply, quietly, profound. An ancient forest on a mountain plateau, where Taoists have meditated for 1,800 years, and where the clouds are more common than the sun. The gate is impressive. What it opens into is what matters. Nine, Anren ancient town in Sichuan. Not everything in China's hidden places is geological. Anren ancient town sits in the Chengdu Plain, 40 kilometers from the provincial capital. It was the private estate of the Liu family, one of the most powerful landlord families in Republican-era China, and its extraordinary state of preservation owes entirely to that family's wealth, which funded the construction of hundreds of buildings across several centuries, and to the town's subsequent obscurity, which meant the 20th century's upheavals largely passed it by. The Zhejiang Museum cluster, adjacent to the ancient town, is itself extraordinary. 30 museums covering the history of the Republican era, World War II in China, the Cultural Revolution, and the history of the Sichuan people. No glossy version of history here. Complex, difficult, honest. Anren is not dramatic. It does not require courage or altitude or special equipment. It requires only attention and the willingness to slow down in a place that has been slowing down successfully for 300 years. Fanjingshan in Guizhou. We return to Guizhou and to what may be the single most dramatic architectural site in all of China, Fanjingshan, the Brahma Pure Mountain. Fanjingshan is the sacred mountain of Maitreya, the Buddha of the future. Its temples have been rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt across 1,500 years of Chinese history. The current structures on the twin spires were constructed in the Ming Dynasty. They have been rebuilt since, but the rock itself, the geological accident that placed two vertical spires of sandstone on top of an already dramatic mountain, has been there for 1.4 billion years. Fanjingshan is an ecological island, a mountain high enough that its forests survived the last ice age as a refugium, a safe harbor for species that went extinct everywhere else. It contains plants and animals found nowhere else on Earth, living in forests that have been continuously inhabited by life since before humans existed. Between the geology and the ecology and the religion and the sheer vertiginous drama, Fanjingshan might be the most remarkable mountain in China that most people have never heard of. 11. Pudakuo National Park in Yunnan. Pudakuo National Park in the Daiqing Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture of Yunnan was the first national park established in China under international standards, and it remains perhaps the finest. The park covers 1,300 square kilometers of the Hingduan Mountains, one of the planet's great biodiversity hotspots, where the mountain ranges of the Tibetan Plateau fan out into the valleys of Yunnan. The elevation range within the park, from 3,500 meters to over 5,000, creates a stacked series of ecosystems that shelters an extraordinary range of life. Pudaku is managed by the Tibetan communities who have lived in these mountains for generations, a model of conservation that keeps local people at the center of both the park's protection and its economic benefits. It is, arguably, the most ethically managed large protected area in China. In Pudaku, the distinctions between wilderness and culture, between sacred and scenic, between ancient and contemporary, they dissolve. What remains is simply a landscape of great, sustained beauty, held carefully by people who understand what they have. "12. Mingsha Mountain and Crescent Spring in Gansu. Few landscapes on Earth achieve the visual perfection of Mingsha Mountain and Crescent Spring. Why the Crescent Lake has survived for millennia at the foot of dunes that by all rights should have buried it is a question that has occupied Chinese scholars and natural scientists for generations. The current best explanation involves wind patterns that carry sand up the dunes and deposit it away from the spring. But the lake behaves as though it has an opinion about its own survival. Dunhuang, the city nearest Mingsha Mountain, was one of the great crossroads of the ancient Silk Road, where merchants from China met traders from Central Asia, Persia, and eventually Rome. The dunes were here then. The spring was here then. The camel trains that crossed them were the internet of their age. The Milky Way over the Gobi Desert is one of the darkest, clearest night skies remaining in East Asia. Come here in summer after the tourists have retired and lie on the sand and look up. Some experiences don't have adequate language. "13. Zhangjiang Colorful Dangxia in Gansu. The Zhangjiang Colorful Dangxia is one of those places that, when you see photographs of it, you assume post-processing, saturation sliders maxed, HDR pushed to absurdity, and then you arrive. The colors are produced by different mineral compositions in each sedimentary layer. Iron oxide producing the reds and oranges, different iron compounds and impurities producing the greens, purples, and yellows. These layers were deposited in an inland sea roughly 24 million years ago. Since then, tectonic activity has tilted and folded them. Erosion has carved them. What remains is a geological layer cake of a scale and color intensity that has no parallel anywhere else on Earth. Chinese painters have been trying to replicate these colors for centuries and have never quite managed it. The landscape outpaints the painters. There is no bad light at Zhangjiang, only different stories. "14. Tianxi, Heavenly Lake, Tianshan in Xinjiang. we move into Xinjiang, China's vast western frontier, and into the Tian Shan Mountains, which run for 2,500 kilometers across Central Asia. They are among the most dramatic mountain ranges on Earth, the spine of the ancient Silk Road, the barrier that separated the Chinese world from the Persian. And at 3,400 meters, in a cirque carved by ancient glaciers, they hold a lake, Tianqi, Heavenly Lake. Tianqi has been called Heaven's Mirror by Chinese poets for over 1,000 years. Its waters are fed by glaciers on the peaks above, filtered through moraines, arriving in the lake cold and clear and seemingly bottomless. The deepest point is over 100 meters. The Kazakh nomads who summer in these mountains are among the last practitioners of true nomadic herding in China. Their seasonal migration to the high pastures around Tianqi follows routes their ancestors traveled for 1,000 years before them. Bogda Peak, reflected in Tianqi on a clear morning, is one of the great mountain reflections on Earth. A perfect, silent double of rock and ice and sky. The Heavenly Lake deserves every syllable of its name. (15) Naladi grassland in Xinjiang. Still in Xinjiang into one of the most quietly perfect landscapes in this entire journey. Naladi grassland. In the Uli Valley, which some Chinese travelers call China's Switzerland. Naladi is a subalpine meadow at 2,000 meters, one of the largest and most pristine grasslands in northern China. The Uli Valley catches more precipitation than the surrounding Xinjiang desert, and the result is a lushness that genuinely surprises people who arrive expecting the dryness of the Silk Road. The Kazakh people of Naladi are, in their own estimation, people of the horse and the grassland. Their relationship with this landscape is not sentimental. It is practical, total, and ancient. The grassland feeds the horses carry the people tend the grassland. A circle that has turned without interruption since before the Chinese Empire was formed. Sometimes the hidden thing is not a cave or a canyon or a glacier. Sometimes it's simply space. (16) Wunu Mountain in Liaoning. From the grasslands of Xinjiang, we travel far east, to China's opposite corner. Northeastern China, Manchuria, in older maps, is a region most international travelers skip entirely. They rush between Beijing and Shanghai and miss one of the continent's great wilderness areas. Wunu Mountain in Liaoning Province is a case in point. Wunu is not a famous mountain. It doesn't appear in most international travel guides. It's not on the standard Chinese tourist circuit, but locals in Liaoning know it as one of the most beautiful places in the Northeast. A mountain of granite peaks, virgin forest, and autumn color that rivals anything in Japan's famed foliage season. The mountain's name means Queen Mountain in Manchu. A reminder that this region was the homeland of the Manchu people, who founded the Qing dynasty and ruled China for nearly 300 years. The forests here were once imperial hunting grounds, which is why they were preserved, and why centuries later, they still feel untouched. Some places justify a journey of thousands of miles. Wunu Mountain justifies the detour. Yandang Mountains in Zhejiang South now, to Zhejiang Province on China's eastern coast, and to a landscape that feels like it was designed by a collaboration between a geologist and a surrealist painter. The Yandang Mountains. Yandang was formed by volcanic activity roughly 120 million years ago. The rocks here are rhyolite, a volcanic stone that weathers into dramatic, vertical forms unlike anything produced by the slower processes of erosion. The result is a landscape of stone pillars, natural arches, hidden gorges, and vertical cliff faces that rise so steeply and so suddenly from the surrounding lowlands that Chinese scholars name them the peaks that fell from heaven. The tradition of naming rock formations in Yandang goes back to the Tang Dynasty, when Buddhist monks built monasteries in the cliffs. Literally carved into the rock face, and spent their years contemplating the extraordinary stone companions outside their windows. Yandang gets less attention than Zhangjiang or Huangshan. This is entirely to your advantage, if you choose to go. Qiandao Lake in Zhejiang. In 1959, the Chinese government built a dam. It flooded a valley in Zhejiang province. The water rose for months, submerging forests and farmland in two ancient cities that had stood for over 1,000 years, and in doing so, accidentally created one of the most beautiful lakes in Asia. Qiandao Lake, Thousand Island Lake, contains 1,078 islands. Every single one of them is the top of a mountain that existed before the dam. The same mountains that farmers and merchants and poets looked at for centuries, now rising from water instead of valley floor. Beneath the surface, 30 meters down in some places, those ancient cities still exist. Lion City, Zhejiang, a city of the Eastern Han Dynasty, over 1,700 years old, lies intact on the lakebed. Its stone walls, its carved gateways, its streets, preserved in cold, dark water, waiting. Qiandao Lake produces some of the cleanest fresh water in China. Its water is drinkable directly from the source, a rarity on the continent. The lake ecosystem is pristine, and the landscape it creates is one of those accidents of history that makes you wonder if the universe has aesthetic opinions. Tianzhu, mountain in Anhui. Anhui province gave China Huangshan, the Yellow Mountain, possibly the most photographed mountain range in Chinese history, the inspiration for the floating peaks of Avatar. But Anhui has another mountain that the cognoscenti prefer, a mountain that the Emperor Qianlong called the first mountain in the world, Tianzhu Mountain, the heavenly pillar. Tianzhu is a granite intrusion, molten rock that forced its way up through the Earth's crust 100 million years ago and was subsequently exposed by erosion. The result is a landscape of enormous rounded forms, smooth as skin in some places, split by dramatic fissures in others, all of it softened by the subtropical forest that clings to every surface. Tianzhu was one of the primary sacred mountains of Taoism, before Taoism had official sacred mountains. Its name appears in texts from the Han Dynasty. Poets climbed it. Emperors paid tribute to it. And for much of China's history, it was considered the spiritual heart of the Yangtze River Valley. Today, it is wonderfully, inexplicably quiet. 20. Zhangjiang Lake in Hunan, China has built many dams. Many reservoirs. And most of them, let's be honest, are not beautiful. Zhangjiang Lake is the exception. Built in the 1980s in Hunan province, Zhangjiang Lake flooded a karst mountain valley and created in the process a landscape of extraordinary accidental beauty. The karst formations, the same type of limestone geology that creates Guilin and Zhangjiang, rise directly from the lake surface, their forests dropping straight into the water. Their cliffs reflected in stillness that makes it impossible to tell where the mountain ends and the mirror begins. The water here is exceptionally clear, deep jade green in the central channels, blue-black in the deeper sections, turquoise where the shallows allow light to scatter. Local people call it the Emerald in Hunan. Zhangjiang Lake is the kind of place you find by accident, by following a road that looked interesting on a map. And then you spend 3 days on a houseboat and miss your train and don't entirely mind. '21. Mount Segunia in Sichuan back to Sichuan, a province that seems to contain more wonders per square kilometer than anywhere else on Earth. In its western mountains, where the Tibetan plateau begins its descent toward the Red Basin, 4 peaks stand together like a family portrait. Mount Zhejiang, the Four Sisters Mountain. The highest of the Four Sisters, Yaome Peak, stands at 6,250 meters, making her one of the most technically challenging climbs in China. Her 3 companions are lower, but no less dramatic. Sheer-sided pyramids of granite and ice that rise from valleys filled with primeval forest, prayer flags, and yak pastures. The Zhejiang area is a biodiversity hotspot. The forests here shelter giant pandas, snow leopards, red pandas, and golden snub-nosed monkeys, some of the rarest mammals on Earth, in valleys that have barely been touched by the 21st century. Mountaineers come here for one of Asia's great technical challenges. Trekkers come for trails through some of the most pristine, high-altitude wilderness on the continent. And some people come simply to stand in the valley and look up and feel briefly very small and very lucky. '22. Wudang Mountains in Hubei. We travel east to Hubei province, the heart of central China, and to a place that has been considered sacred for over 1,000 years. The Wudang Mountains. Wudang is where Taoism was born in stone. The Emperor Yongle, during the Ming Dynasty, sent 300,000 workers into these mountains to build a complex of temples, palaces, and shrines that would take 12 years to complete. The result is one of the most extraordinary acts of religious architecture in human history. 72 peaks, each one home to a sacred site, all of it woven together by 130 kilometers of ancient mountain paths. But Wudang isn't just a place of stone and history. It's a living spiritual center. Taoist monks still train here in the ancient martial arts that Wudang gave to the world. The slow-flowing movements you're watching were developed in these very mountains, discipline and meditation expressed through the body. There's a reason travelers who come to Wudang often describe it as the most quietly powerful place they've ever stood. The mountains here don't shout. They whisper. And if you stay long enough, you start to hear what they're saying. '23. Mount Huashan in Shanxi. If Wudang is quiet power, Huashan is pure terror. Huashan, in Shanxi province, is considered one of China's 5 sacred mountains, and it may be the most dramatic piece of rock on the planet. The peaks here are not rounded or gradual, they are vertical, sheer. Enormous slabs of gray granite that rise straight up from the valley floor and simply stop at the sky. The mountain has been a place of pilgrimage for over 2,000 years. Taoists built temples on its summits in the belief that the closer you were to heaven, the more clearly you could hear the divine. The paths they carved to reach those temples remain among the most dangerous trails in the world. The Changkong plank walk. Boards barely wider than your foot, a single chain to hold. The abyss yawning open beneath you. This is not metaphor. This is Tuesday for the people who make this climb. At the top, the world opens. The Wei River Valley stretches to the horizon. The city of Xi'an, home of the terracotta warriors, glitters in the distance, and you realize why people have been climbing this terrifying mountain for 2 millennia. Some views are worth the fear. 24. Erechai Lake, Dali in Yunnan. From the heights of Shanxi, we descend into the warmth of Yunnan, China's most romantic province, to a lake that has been celebrated in poetry and painting for over 1,000 years. Erechai Lake. Erechai means ear-shaped sea, named for its distinctive curved outline when seen from the air. It sits at 1,972 meters above sea level, cradled between the Kang Mountains to the west and the ancient city of Dali to the east. It is home to the Bai people, one of China's oldest ethnic groups, whose distinctive blue and white architecture lines the lakeside villages. Cormorant fishing on Erechai is one of the last places in China where this ancient practice survives. The fishermen, usually elderly men from Bai families who have done this for generations, tie a ring loosely around the bird's throat so it cannot swallow its catch. The cormorant dives, the fisherman retrieves. It is a partnership that goes back thousands of years. In the evenings, the cafes along the Erechai shores fill with young people from all over China. Writers, artists, travelers who came for a week and stayed for a year. There's something in the quality of light here, in the slow pace of the water, that makes time feel different. You arrive at Erechai in a hurry. You leave it reluctantly. '25. Tiantai Mountain in Zhejiang. Zhejiang province on China's eastern coast is not a place most international travelers associate with wilderness. It's the home of Alibaba and Hangzhou and some of China's most prosperous cities. But inland, the province hides a mountain that has shaped Chinese Buddhism for 15 centuries. Tiantai Mountain. Tiantai is considered the birthplace of the Tiantai school of Buddhism, a philosophical tradition that spread from this mountain to Korea, Japan, and across East Asia. The Guoqing Temple here, founded in 598 AD, is older than most European cathedrals. It has been continuously active for over 1,400 years. But what makes Tiantai unforgettable is not just its spiritual weight, it's the landscape. Waterfalls that drop from nowhere into deep forest pools. Limestone formations that Taoist poets compared to celestial palaces. Trails that wind for days through bamboo groves and ancient pine forests that feel unchanged since the Tang dynasty. There are places that hold history lightly, and places that carry it like something sacred. Tiantai carries it like something sacred. '26, Canis Lake Geological Park in Xinjiang. We need to talk about Canis Lake, because when most people think of Xinjiang, they think of desert, Silk Road, the vast Taklamakan. And that landscape exists. We've seen it. But the northern tip of Xinjiang, where the mountains of China, Russia, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan nearly converge, is a completely different world. Canis Lake sits at 1,374 meters above sea level in the Altai Mountains. It's a glacial lake, formed by meltwater from glaciers that have been retreating since the last ice age. The water gets its extraordinary color from suspended glacial sediment that scatters light in a way that seems to shift with the time of day. Blue in the morning, green at noon, gold at sunset. The Tuvan people who live along Canis Lake are one of the smallest ethnic groups in China, fewer than 3,000 people. They are horse herders and hunters who have maintained their traditional way of life in these mountains longer than most civilizations have existed. Come in October and you will see something that genuinely stops your breath. The Altai forest in full autumn color, its golds and reds and oranges pouring down to the edge of a lake that looks like it was borrowed from a dream. Canis Lake is the most beautiful place in China that you've never heard of. '27, Longji rice terraces in Guangxi. Some landscapes are made by geology, by water and time and the slow grinding of tectonic plates, and some landscapes are made by people. The Longji terraces in Guangxi province were carved out of these mountains by the Zhuang and Yao peoples beginning approximately 650 years ago, during the Yuan dynasty. Generation after generation, they cut into the mountain, shaped the rock, built retaining walls by hand, and diverted water through an intricate irrigation system that still functions today. Without pumps, without electricity, without any technology invented after the 14th century. The Red Yao women who tend these terraces are perhaps as famous as the terraces themselves. Their tradition of growing hair for their entire lives, sometimes to lengths of 2 meters, and wearing it coiled in elaborate arrangements, is one of the most distinctive cultural practices in all of China. There's a rhythm to this landscape that you can almost hear, a rhythm of planting and harvest, of water flowing downhill through channels built by hands long dead, still doing their work. The Longji terraces are not a monument to the past. They are a living agricultural system, still feeding the same families who built them. That's more impressive than any wall. '28, Tianshan Grand Canyon in Xinjiang. One final return to Xinjiang, and this one will make you do a double take. The Tian Shan Grand Canyon, or Qizilia Canyon, sits in the foothills of the Tian Shan Range, a detour from the ancient Silk Road city of Kucha. And it looks, in almost every respect, like it was teleported from the American Southwest. Red sandstone, slot canyons, sweeping arches of layered rock. The resemblance to Utah's canyon country is striking, and the geology is similar. Both are the product of ancient sedimentary rock, deposited when this region was an inland sea, slowly carved by water over tens of millions of years. But Tian Shan Canyon has something the American Southwest does not. It is utterly, staggeringly uncrowded. The number of international visitors who find their way to this remote corner of Xinjiang is a fraction of what descends on Antelope Canyon or Zion each year. You can walk through this canyon in silence. You can hear the stream. You can stand in a corridor of 300-million-year-old rock and feel completely alone with the planet. For travelers willing to make the journey, and it requires intention, Tian Shan Canyon rewards you with something increasingly rare in our crowded world: solitude and wonder. '29. Mount Wutai in Shaanxi. We come to our final destination, and it may be the most quietly powerful of them all. Few mountains in the world carry the weight of devotion that rests on Mount Wutai. Wutai Mountain in Shanxi Province is considered the earthly home of Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom in Mahayana Buddhism. It is one of China's 4 sacred Buddhist mountains, and it has been a destination for pilgrims from China, Tibet, Mongolia, Korea, and Japan for well over 1,500 years. What makes Wutai extraordinary is that it is not just one tradition. It is a living crossroads of Chinese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and Mongolian Buddhism, 3 distinct but related practices sharing the same mountain. You can walk from a classical Chinese temple, all curved eaves and lacquered red, to a Tibetan monastery with butter lamps and Thangka paintings in the space of 10 minutes. The Great White Pagoda of Taiyuan Temple has stood on this plateau since the Ming Dynasty. It contains, according to Buddhist tradition, a sacred hair relic of the historical Buddha. Pilgrims have circumambulated it continuously for 5 centuries. Mount Wutai asks nothing of you in particular. No specific belief, no particular practice. It simply holds a quality of stillness that you rarely encounter anywhere else on Earth. And perhaps that is the right note on which to end. China contains multitudes. It is the world's largest populated country, one of its oldest civilizations, its fastest changing society. And somehow, within all of that change and continuity and complexity, these places exist. Glaciers that glow blue in the morning light. Caves filled with formations that took longer to grow than our species has existed. Lakes that choose colors no one asked them to choose. Mountains that have held prayers in their stones for 2,000 years. The places we visited today are not relics. They are not preserved in amber. They are alive. Alive with the geology of a restless planet. Alive with the cultures of people who have called them home. Alive with the attention of travelers who have crossed half the world to stand at their edges and feel small and grateful, and briefly, quietly awake. There's more China than anyone can see in a lifetime.